The wind, a razor's edge, scoured the skeletal branches of the cottonwoods, a mournful dirge echoing across the frozen plains. Winter had sunk its teeth deep into the land, and even the air seemed to ache with the cold. Alara huddled deeper into her threadbare shawl, her breath pluming white before her. She was not a small woman. Her frame was solid, built for endurance, and the years of sparse living had only softened her edges, leaving a cushioning that some might have called plump, but which, in this unforgiving wilderness, was simply a testament to her tenacity. Yet her brother, Finn, saw it only as a burden, another mouth to feed, a body that couldn't move with the lean swiftness he admired. His gaze, when it landed on her, was always heavy with resentment. They had been on the move for weeks, chasing a rumor of unclaimed land, of opportunity, but finding only more hardship. Their wagon, a rickety skeleton, had lost a wheel days ago, leaving them stranded in the biting cold. Hope, for Alara, was a concept as distant and fleeting as the sun on a midwinter's day. Despair, however, was a constant companion, cold and sharp in her belly. She watched Finn now, his back to her, silhouetted against the pale, bruised sky. He was talking to a man who had appeared from the vast emptiness, silent as a shadow, astride a powerful, dark horse. The stranger was tall, gaunt, his face a landscape of etched lines, his eyes shadowed beneath the brim of a wide hat. He radiated an aura of quiet strength, but also a profound, unreadable solitude that made Alara's stomach clench. He was a widower, Finn had muttered earlier, heading west, perhaps to forget, perhaps to rebuild. Finn's voice, when it carried on the wind, was low, urgent, laced with a desperation Alara knew all too well. She didn't need to hear the words to understand the transaction unfolding. She knew her worth in his eyes. Negligible. A burden. A mouth. He had spoken often of his desire to be free, to travel unencumbered, and she, his only surviving kin, was the anchor around his neck. The stranger gestured vaguely towards her, and Alara flinched, pulling the shawl tighter. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a terrified bird trapped in a cage. She was property less than a mare, less than a sack of grain. $10, she heard Finn say, his voice rising slightly, thin and reedy with the cold. $10 and she's yours, Elias. Good for tending a hearth, good for a meal. A sturdy woman, the stranger, Elias, merely nodded, his gaze sweeping over Alara for a moment before settling back on Finn. There was no judgment in his eyes, no overt curiosity, only a stillness that was unnerving. He reached into his coat, produced a small leather pouch and counted out a few coins. The metallic clink was deafening in the silence of the plain, each coin a hammer blow against Alara's dissolving dignity. She was sold, traded like chattel, for a paltry sum. $10. Her brother, her own blood, had bartered her away as if she were nothing more than an encumbrance, a living commodity, her spirit crushed under the weight of his callousness and the biting cold that seeped into her very bones. The transaction was complete, a horrifying testament to her worthlessness in the eyes of the one person who should have protected her. She stood frozen, not daring to meet the widower's gaze, her future a terrifying, blank canvas painted in shades of gray and stark white snow. Elias's quiet voice cut through the wind, surprisingly deep. "Best get your things, ma'am. We've a long ride ahead." Alara didn't stir. Her eyes remained fixed on Finn, who, with the coins clutched in his fist, was already turning away, a relieved lightness in his step. He didn't spare her a backward glance, not a word of farewell, not an acknowledgement of the years they had shared, however fractured. He simply walked away, shrinking into the vast, indifferent landscape, abandoning her to a fate unknown. The betrayal was a fresh wound, bleeding silently in the biting cold. Elias dismounted, his movements economical, unhurried. He secured his horse to a stunted sapling, then approached the broken wagon. "Anything you need from here?" he asked, his voice devoid of pity, yet not unkind. He wasn't looking at her, but at the remnants of her life, the few meager possessions scattered inside the wagon bed. Alara found her voice, a dry, rusty whisper. There's a quilt. My mother's. She pointed to a faded, patched bundle. Elias retrieved it, shaking out the dust and snow, then folded it carefully before handing it to her. His fingers, calloused and strong, brushed hers, a brief, impersonal contact that still sent a shiver through her. She clutched the quilt to her chest, its worn fabric a flimsy shield against the cold and the terror coiling in her gut. He didn't offer her a hand up onto his horse, nor did he rush her. He simply stood, patient, waiting. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken questions. Alara took a deep breath, the frigid air burning her lungs, and somehow found the strength to hoist herself onto the horse's back, settling behind him. The animal was broad and sturdy, its warmth a small comfort against the penetrating chill. Elias mounted smoothly in front of her, his back a solid wall. He didn't speak again, simply nudged the horse forward, and they began to move, leaving Finn's receding figure and the broken wagon behind. The world was nothing but endless white, a sky the color of lead, and the relentless wind. Alara focused on the rhythmic sway of the horse, the creak of the leather, the scent of horse and leather and Elias, a clean, earthy smell. She dared not look at him, her gaze fixed on the expanse of his broad shoulders, the way his dark hat was pulled low, obscuring his face. Hours passed in a silent blur of motion and cold. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples and grays before darkness swallowed them whole. Elias didn't stop until the stars began to prick through the gloom. He led the horse towards a small, rocky overhang, a meager shelter from the wind. Wordlessly, he dismounted, then offered a hand to Alara. This time, she took it, her fingers stiff with cold, and allowed him to help her down. He started a small, smokeless fire, using dry roots and scrub brush, the flickering flames the only beacon in the vast darkness. He produced a small tin of coffee and a tin cup, heating water over the fire. The aroma, rich and earthy, was a potent comfort, a promise of warmth and a brief respite from the hunger that gnawed at her. He offered her the cup without a word, his movements precise and quiet. She took it, her hands trembling slightly, and gratefully sipped the hot, bitter liquid. It scalded her tongue but thawed the chill that had settled deep in her bones. She watched him, surreptitiously, as he ate a piece of hardtack, his profile stark against the firelight. He was not cruel, not overtly, but neither was he kind in a way she understood. He was simply efficient, practical. She was a burden, perhaps, but a burden to be dealt with, not discarded. And in that, there was a strange, unsettling measure of respect. The following days were a blur of travel, the rhythm of the horse, the relentless cold, and the profound silence between them. Elias spoke only when necessary, directions, warnings of rough terrain, quiet instructions to hold on. Alara observed him slowly, tentatively. He was meticulous, careful with his supplies, never wasteful. He tended to his horse with a quiet devotion, brushing its coat, checking its hooves, murmuring low words Alara couldn't quite catch. He shared his meager rations without complaint, always ensuring she had her portion. Once, when a bitter gust of wind threatened to tear the thin quilt from her shoulders, he pulled a thick, worn wool blanket from his saddlebag and draped it over her, not with a flourish, but with a simple, decisive movement. There was no pity in his eyes, but a quiet, almost clinical concern for her well-being, as if she were a valuable piece of equipment that needed to be kept in working order. Alara, for her part, tried to make herself as unobtrusive as possible. She offered to help with the camp chores, gathering firewood, fetching water when they found a stream. He accepted her help with a curt nod, never refusing, never demanding more. She cooked the small meals over their tiny fire, her hands surprisingly adept despite the cold. She realized, in those quiet moments, that her plumpness, which Finn had despised, was in fact a resilience, a protection against the brutal cold, a testament to her strength. Her body was not a flaw, but a fortress, built to endure. One evening, as the last sliver of sun painted the western sky in fiery oranges, Elara felt a tremor pass through the horse, then through Elias's body in front of her. She looked up, following his gaze. In the distance, a vast, dark cloud was gathering, not of rain, but of dust. A stampede. Elias reacted instantly, urging the horse into a desperate gallop, not towards, but away, seeking the sparse cover of a cluster of boulders. He pulled the horse to a jarring halt, dismounting swiftly and pulling her down with him, shoving her behind the largest boulder. "Stay down," he commanded, his voice tight, strained, utterly without the usual calm. He drew a rifle from his saddle sheath, his eyes scanning the horizon, assessing the danger. The ground began to tremble, a low rumble that grew into a thunderous roar. The air filled with the panicked bellows of cattle, the pounding of hooves, a primal wave of chaos hurtling towards them. Elara pressed herself against the cold rock, her heart a frantic drum in her chest. She watched Elias, his face grim, his body tense, holding the rifle ready. He was not afraid, not in the way she understood fear, but he was utterly focused, utterly prepared to meet the threat. A stray steer, eyes wide with terror, veered off course, heading straight for their meager shelter. Elias moved, a blur of motion, firing a shot into the ground before the animal, startling it, forcing it to change direction. The roar of the stampede was deafening, the ground vibrating beneath them, dirt and pebbles raining down. Elara squeezed her eyes shut, clinging to the rock, until, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The sound receded, fading into the distance, leaving behind an eerie silence, broken only by their ragged breathing. Elias slowly lowered his rifle, his shoulders slumping slightly. He turned to her, his gaze finally meeting hers fully. There was no mistaking the quiet relief in his eyes. "That was close," he murmured, his voice hoarse. For the first time, Elara felt a flicker of something beyond fear or apprehension. She saw not a stranger, not an owner, but a man who had protected her, not because she was a possession, but because she was a person. They rode on for another week, crossing a desolate range, the land stark and beautiful in its unforgiving grandeur. Elias's homestead appeared suddenly, tucked into a shallow valley, a modest cabin of rough-hewn logs, a lean-to stable, and a small, fenced enclosure. It was isolated, quiet, a place that felt both lonely and profoundly peaceful. The cabin was spare, clean, and filled with a quiet emptiness that spoke volumes. A single, neatly made bed, a sturdy table, 2 chairs, a stone hearth. No trinkets, no frivolous adornments, only the essentials. Elara's gaze landed on a small, hand-carved wooden bird on the mantelpiece, its wings outstretched as if in flight. It was the only object that hinted at another presence, a life that had once filled these rooms. Elias saw her looking at it. "My wife, Sarah," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "She carved it," he paused, then added, "She loved birds. Always said they were the freest creatures." The words hung in the air, a whisper of loss that finally cracked through his stoic facade. Elara felt a pang of unexpected empathy. He was not just a quiet man, but a grieving one. He showed her around the well, the small root cellar, the shed. He didn't assign her tasks, didn't tell her what she must do. Instead, he worked alongside her quietly, efficiently. He repaired a loose shutter, fetched water, split firewood. Elara, in turn, began to clean the cabin, to make it feel less like a tomb and more like a home. She swept the dust, aired out the blankets, tended the fire. She found a small bag of dried herbs and began to brew a tea that smelled of mint and rosemary. One evening, as the fire crackled in the hearth, casting long shadows on the walls, Elara asked, "Why me, Elias? Why $10 for a woman you don't even know?" He looked up from the leather strap he was mending, his gaze steady. Finn was desperate. He'd have sold his own teeth for a meal. "As for you," he paused, his eyes searching hers, no longer veiled. "You have good hands, a steady eye. You don't complain, and you look like you know how to survive." He put down his tools, leaned back against the wall, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "This life, It's not for the weak. Sarah. She was gentle, and she faded like a winter flower. I thought, perhaps another pair of hands. But I saw something more in you. Something resilient. He paused again, then finally uttered the words that would redefine everything. You see, Alara, you are worth more than gold. More than any price Finn could put on you. Your spirit, your strength. That's worth more than anything I could ever buy. The words weren't a declaration of love, but something deeper, more profound. A recognition of her inherent human value. A value that her own brother had dismissed. It was the first time anyone had truly seen her, not for what she lacked, but for what she was, for what she was capable of. A warmth spread through her, not from the fire, but from within, a quiet blossoming of dignity. The spring arrived, tentative at first, then with a sudden burst of life, green unfurling across the valleys, wildflowers painting the hills. Alara, now standing taller, felt a similar burgeoning within herself. The cabin, once a place of quiet emptiness, hummed with a newfound purpose. She and Elias worked side by side, clearing land, planting a small garden, their movements a silent, seamless dance born of shared effort and growing understanding. One afternoon, a rider approached, kicking up dust from the trail. It was Finn. He looked thinner, harsher, his eyes darting around the small homestead with a greedy glint. He dismounted, a false smile plastered on his face. Well, little sister, you've landed on your feet, haven't you? Heard tell you were doing well. Thought I'd drop by, see if you needed a helping hand. Old family, and all. His gaze fell on Elias, standing silently by Alara's side, his presence a formidable shield. Finn cleared his throat nervously. Perhaps, Elias, you might consider selling her back? For a bit more, of course. She's clearly prospered here. Alara stepped forward, her voice clear and steady, devoid of the fear that had once choked her. I am not for sale, Finn. Not for $10. Not for 1,000 inch. She met his gaze directly, her eyes shining with a new, quiet strength. My worth is not measured in coin, and it never was. You taught me that. Ironically enough, Finn recoiled, surprised by her defiance, by the woman she had become. He mumbled something about a mistake, about family, but his words lacked conviction. Elias stepped forward then, placing a hand gently on Alara's shoulder, a gesture of quiet possessiveness that spoke volumes. His voice was low, dangerous. She chose to stay, Finn. She is not bound by any transaction made in a moment of your desperation. She is her own woman now. Finn, sensing the unyielding resolve in both their stances, hesitated, then turned and remounted his horse, fleeing the valley with a haste born of discomfort. He did not look back. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a fitting canvas for a new beginning. Alara turned to Elias, her eyes soft. Thank you, she whispered, the words inadequate to express the depth of her gratitude, the profound shift he had brought to her life. He simply nodded, his gaze gentle. You found your own way, Alara. I merely opened the door. He looked at the cabin, then back at her. This place, it was empty for too long. Now it feels like a home again. He reached out, slowly, and took her hand. His touch was warm, comforting, a silent promise of partnership. It wasn't a romance born of grand gestures, but of quiet resilience, of shared hardship, of an unspoken understanding that had blossomed in the desolate wilderness. She had arrived as a broken girl, a burden sold for a pittance, but now she stood as a woman, strong, dignified, her own worth affirmed not by gold, but by her spirit, by the quiet man who had seen beyond the superficial, recognizing that some things, like the human heart and the will to survive, were indeed worth more than any earthly treasure. The future was still uncertain, but it was theirs to build, together, brick by quiet brick, under the vast, watchful sky.